in the silent tomb of a room. He hesitated at the threshold, his trembling hand hovering above the brass doorknob. The crisp chill of November had seeped into the dark mahogany wood, a bitter cold that echoed in his gut. Each fibre within him quivered with an anticipation he had not known for years, perhaps decades. His heart stuttered in its cage, captive to a past it yearned to rewrite. His fingers brushed against the cool metal doorknob, its icy touch jolting him back to reality, an abrupt awakening from the gossamer fragments of memory that danced like dust motes on sunbeams in his mind's eye. A sharp inhale filled his lungs with the sterile scent of neglect, a scent he'd come to associate with this house. His house. Now it was just a carcass, empty and hollowed out. Yet within these silent walls echoed the clamour of yesteryears. Laughter once youthful and wild now resonated as haunting echoes. Arguments that had crackled with incandescent fury were now hushed whispers clinging desperately to peeling wallpaper. He was stepping into a mausoleum of ghosts, remnants of relationships lost and love tarnished. His father's voice still lingered in the woodwork, stern yet warm, flecked with disappointment or pride, depending upon which memory claimed dominion over his mind's landscape. As he crossed this most sacred threshold, time stretched itself thin and fragile around him like spun glass. He felt older now than ever before, weathered by storms internal more than external, yet paradoxically juvenile, drawn back into the role he played as an unruly son seeking validation from an unyielding father. His eyes travelled across familiar furnishings, the armchair where father had sat like a patriarchal king amongst subjects, their shared history etched into every worn crevice of leather, the grandfather clock that had stood as sentinel, its tick-tock a heartbeat in this home of heartache. His gaze finally rested upon an old photograph, father and him smiling during happier times, immortalized within its silver frame. Tears welled up unbidden, like the first raindrops threatening to break the drought. He blinked them away, their journey incomplete, and tasted regret, salt-laced and profound. His hand hesitated once more before he reached out and touched the photograph lightly, almost reverently. A silent apology whispered to the past, an act of forgiveness extended towards himself. With a sigh heavy with reconciliation yet light with newfound resolve, he closed the door behind him and stepped into his past, ready to face it, to forgive it, to finally let it go. The air between him and these ghostly remnants thickened with anticipation, their unresolved story yearning for closure, a chapter of reconciliation in the book of his life. The room was stifling, the air heavy with dust that danced in scattered rays of sunlight filtering through the worn-out blinds. The sharp scent of old wood and something faintly sour, a ghost of times past, clung to every surface. He could feel the peeling paint under his fingertips as he ran his hands over the faded wallpaper, a texture rough yet oddly comforting. His father's house. John had not stepped foot in this place since he stormed out 20 years ago, his young heart ablaze with resentment and hurt. But now he was here, standing amidst memories that were as tangible as the dust motes swirling around him. There was a tension twining itself around John's gut, coiling tighter with each passing second like some relentless serpent, an age-old argument echoing through time waiting for its resolution. He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat, tasting regret bitterer than black coffee. His eyes drifted to an old armchair by the corner, worn leather patched up in places. It mirrored their relationship. He remembered how his father would sit there for hours on end, staring into nothingness, a 1,000-yard stare marking lines on his weather-beaten face, lines that were etched deep into John's memory. A sudden gust blew in from an open window, sending old photographs fluttering down from a dusty shelf like leaves in autumn, faces frozen in smiles that failed to reach their eyes, a parade of forced happiness. He picked one up gently as if it was made of glass, his mother radiant, himself giddy with youthful exuberance, and beside them, his father, a mere spectre even then, unsmiling, distant. Shaking off the icy grip of nostalgia, John looked around the room again, seeing past its time-ravaged state to what it once was, full of life and laughter before silence claimed it. His anger at his father's emotional absence had burned bright and fierce, a star collapsing in on itself until there was nothing left but a black hole of resentment. But with distance and age came understanding. His father hadn't been a bad man, just a flawed one, as scarred by life as the cracked leather of his old armchair. A man who wore sorrow like a second skin, yet tried to shield his son from the same fate. The coiling serpent loosened slightly, forgiveness unfurling its delicate tendrils within him, stretching out towards reconciliation. It would take time. Forgiveness wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow-burning ember that needed nurturing. He looked at the armchair once more and could almost see his father sitting there, his eyes distant yet full of unspoken love. John took a deep breath, tasting dust-laden air laced with hints of hope, heart pulsating with an intensity that threatened to crack open his rib-cage, each beat whispering, "It's not too late." The weight of unresolved emotions hung heavy in the air around him, but he felt ready to face them, to let them wash over him like healing rain, seeping into the parched earth of their relationship. This room was no longer just his father's house. It was becoming a sanctuary for their fractured bond, a testament to resilience and love surviving amidst regret and bitterness. Reconciliation wouldn't come easy. It would be a journey paved with potholes of past hurt and roadblocks of resentment, but he was willing to walk that path, for both himself and for his father. He owed them that much. And so he stayed, allowing the ticking clock on the mantelpiece to lull him into familiarity, each tick echoing promises of healing in this aged hothouse. With every passing moment stitched together by threads of acceptance and understanding, John realized that forgiveness was not simply about absolving past sins. It was about healing wounds, bridging chasms, and finding love amidst ruins. And as he looked around the room once more, he finally felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The room hung heavy with a silence that was almost palpable. The still air was as cold and unyielding as the long frozen rift between them. A worn leather sofa, remnants of childhood laughter, and the fading scent of his father's tobacco acted as relics of their shared past. John's heart pounded like an untamed horse in his chest, each beat echoing a litany of unresolved hurts. He could taste the bitterness of regret on his tongue, harsh and metallic. The tension hummed in his veins, electric and raw, winding him tighter than a clock's spring. His fingers twitched around the crumpled photo in his hand, a candid shot of a grinning younger version of himself perched atop broad paternal shoulders, its edges as jagged as the shards of their fractured relationship. Across from him sat his father, once an imposing figure now wilted by time and remorse. His brows were drawn together, wrinkles etched deeply from years of worry and misunderstanding. Even under layers of age-old resentment, John could still see the trace of kindness that had always been buried beneath his father's hardened exterior. In this moment, a moment stretched thin over years of silence, it was not anger that filled John, but a longing so acute it stole his breath away. He saw not the stern disciplinarian who'd failed to understand him, but an aging man drowning in sorrowful solitude. Bitter memories softened around the edges, giving way to an ache that was more profound than fury. A chess set lay between them on the coffee table, pieces scattered chaotically, knights toppled over rooks, kings laying defenceless, a stark mirror image to their own life's turmoil. "Dad," he began, voice strained with emotion he'd kept damned for far too long. His words fell into the room like stones cast into still water, casting ripples across the stagnant silence. His father's gaze lifted, eyes fogged with anticipation. In the breath that followed, the room seemed to shrink, drawing them together across the chasm of their estranged past. He could see his own reflection in his father's worn-out eyes, not a spectre of resentment, but a manifestation of shared pain and disjointed love. It felt like standing on the precipice of something monumental, like forgiveness, like reconciliation. John exhaled, the weight of years lifting off his chest, as he reached out with trembling hands to reset the scattered chess pieces. Through this simple act, he wordlessly communicated his desire for amends, his willingness to fight for a bond that was never truly broken. The air shifted then, warmer somehow, no longer filled with icy silence but brimming with unspoken words and hope. Theirs was not a relationship that could be mended with an apology or two. It would take time and patience. But in this moment, in their silent acceptance and shared heartache, they had found their beginning towards healing. Sometimes, silence spoke louder than words ever could. In the quiet stillness of their father's study, they stood. The mahogany desk, as unyielding and stoic as the man it once belonged to, bore the weight of years in its polished surface. The son, a man fully grown yet feeling small under his father's towering legacy, traced his fingers along its cool edge. His skin absorbed the temperature like a memory, crisp edges of an old photograph that held not only images but scents and textures too. His heart pounded in his chest with all the resonance of a muffled drumbeat echoing through fog-draped woods. The bitter taste of regret clung to the roof of his mouth as he opened one of the desk drawers and found an old leather-bound journal. His father's last words. His gaze skimmed over words imprinted with passion, loss, and ultimately forgiveness. As he read, it was as if he were hearing his father's voice again, strong yet tempered with age, softening around the corners with unconditional love, a love he'd always struggled to see past their disagreements and heated arguments. Their shared history unfurled itself on those worn pages. Memories of fishing trips under bronze sunsets and whispered lessons under moonlit skies filled him with profound longing. He could almost feel his father's rough hand patting him on the back in encouragement or tousling his hair after a shared joke. His eyes blurred over words traced by hands now long cold. A lump rose in his throat, tangible remorse that tasted of salted wounds no longer avoidable. Their unfinished symphony echoed off walls thick with familial tension left unresolved until this moment. The son drew in a deep breath heavy with dust and disuse. It was laced with aftershave, strong and spicy notes cutting through time like an intimate whisper from beyond, from a father to a son burdened by old grudges. He had yearned for reconciliation, for absolution. The pain of their fractured relationship wove itself into every crevice of his being, a constant companion to his solitary existence. But the words on those pages whispered to him what he had been too stubborn to hear in life. Forgiveness is not an act. It's a journey. The son sank into his father's old chair, its leather creaking in recognition, his body heavy with the weight of unspoken apologies and unshed tears. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard against the rising tide of regret, and let out a shuddering breath, surrendering to the unbearable lightness of forgiveness. Gone was the silent fortress he'd constructed over years around his heart, shattered by an invisible hand reaching from past memories into his very soul. A single tear slipped down onto the journal's weathered pages, blurring ink with salt water, cleansing old wounds with its salty balm. In that moment, he felt his father's spirit resonate within him, their shared blood and a bond forged by love and conflict melding into one. A wave of warmth washed over him, acceptance wrapped in understanding, as he embarked on this new journey towards reconciliation with a man no longer there but ever present. In that quiet stillness, under the gaze of ghostly portraits and cloaked in aging shadows cast by flickering candlelight, the adult son found peace, not just with his father's memory but within himself. Through forgiveness and remembrance, they were reconciled at last. Two souls bound by love, set free by understanding and time's gentle touch.